The desert canyon was silent, but silence in war was never peace. Silence meant something was waiting, something unseen, something deadly. Down below, hidden among jagged rocks and dry riverbeds, a team of Green Berets was pinned down. Dust swirled around them, bullets cracked against stone, and their radios were filled with the clipped voices of men holding the line with everything they had left. They were outnumbered, surrounded, and running out of time. And then, high above the canyon, came a sound that would change everything. A thunderous roar, low and angry, echoing across the mountains like a storm rolling in. It was the sound of an A-10 warthog, ugly, brutal, and built for one purpose: to save the lives of those on the ground. But the pilot inside wasn't just another warrior in the sky. She was something the enemy never expected. She was the storm. Her name was Captain Sarah Viper Hale. She had grown up far from deserts and gunfire, in a small town where the biggest danger was a broken fence after a storm. But she had always looked to the sky. As a child, she'd press her face to the glass whenever jets tore across the horizon, her heart pounding at the sound of engines rattling the earth. She told her father once, "One day, I'll fly one of those." He had laughed, half believing, half not. But Sarah was not a girl of half-belief. Every dream she ever touched, she held onto with iron hands. And now, years later, that dream had brought her to this moment, into the cockpit of the A-10, strapped to a machine that sounded like thunder and struck like lightning. The Green Berets below didn't know her face. They didn't know her story. All they knew was that they were dying in that canyon, and whoever was up there in the clouds was their last chance. Their leader, Captain Donovan, had crawled behind a slab of stone, clutching a radio to his chest. His men were bleeding. 2 had already gone silent. The enemy fire was closing in tighter and tighter, as if the canyon itself was folding to crush them. Donovan pressed the radio, his voice raw. "We need support now. Anyone. We won't last another 5 minutes." At first, only static answered him. Then, a calm female voice cut through the chaos. "Steady as steel. This is Viper. Hold your position. I'm inbound." Donovan blinked, sweat streaking through the dust on his face. A woman. He didn't care. Angel, devil, ghost. If she could get them out alive, she was salvation. Sarah's A-10 dove lower, engines screaming against the hot air. From above, the canyon looked like a scar cut deep into the earth, alive with muzzle flashes and fire. She could see the enemy lines spreading like an infection, pushing in toward the small cluster of men in the center. Her grip tightened on the controls. Training took over. Fear didn't matter here. Only precision, only timing. She keyed her mic. "I see you. I've got eyes on your position. Brace yourselves." Then the warthog howled. Its GAE Avenger cannon lit up the sky, spitting fire and steel. The sound so loud it shook the canyon walls. It was the voice of destruction, a roar that split the night. Sarah carved through the battlefield like a blade, tearing into the enemy positions, sending shockwaves of dirt and flame up into the air. Below, the Green Berets lifted their heads for the first time in hours. They saw death raining down on their enemies, and hope flickered where despair had lived. But Sarah knew this fight wasn't won yet. A canyon was a cage, and cages were dangerous for aircraft. One mistake and she could slam into the rock face. One missile from the enemy and her A-10 would be nothing but wreckage burning in the dust. Yet she didn't pull back. Not once. Every pass she made was lower, closer, her jet practically scraping the canyon walls. Her voice never wavered over the radio. "Stay low. Stay alive. I've got you." Inside the cockpit, sweat burned her eyes, her knuckles white around the controls. The enemy wasn't breaking, they were adapting. A flash from below caught her eye. Shoulder-fired missile. In a split second, her instincts screamed. She banked hard, the missile screaming past her tail. Alarms blared in the cockpit. Too close. 1 inch the wrong way, and she would have been gone. But Sarah steadied her breath. Not today. Not while men on the ground still needed her. On the canyon floor, Donovan was dragging one of his wounded men when he heard her voice again. "I'm going to make another run. Mark your positions with smoke." With trembling hands, Donovan pulled a red smoke grenade from his vest, yanked the pin, and hurled it into the air. The crimson cloud billowed against the brown rocks, a desperate signal to the sky. Sarah saw it instantly. "Copy that. Hold on. She rolled her A-10 into a steep dive, the kind that turned stomachs and tested souls. The world blurred into a rush of color and speed, the canyon walls flashing past like knives. The enemy opened fire, tracers ripping through the air. She locked onto their nests, pressed the trigger, and the warthog unleashed hell. Explosions ripped the ground, fire swallowed bunkers, and men scattered like shadows under a storm. But even as she struck, she knew this wasn't enough. There were too many, and they weren't retreating. Not yet. The canyon was a trap, and the Green Berets were still inside it. Sarah keyed her mic again, her voice harder now. "Captain Donovan, listen carefully. I'm going to clear you an exit. When I give the word, you move. Don't look back. Do you understand?" Donovan's reply was hoarse, but it came. Understood. She nodded to herself. This was it. She climbed high, circling, scanning every line of the canyon. Her fuel was burning low. She had one chance to break the enemy's hold, one chance to carve a path for the soldiers below. And then, in the corner of her vision, she saw it. The enemy's heavy machine guns, hidden in the rocks, positioned perfectly to cut down anyone who tried to escape. Her jaw tightened. She'd have to take them out herself, up close, inside the canyon, where the margin for error was zero. A run like that wasn't survival. It was a gamble with death. Sarah closed her eyes for half a second, just enough to steady her pulse. She thought of her father, of her promise to fly, of every lesson written in scars and sweat. She thought of the men below, broken but not beaten, waiting for her, and she whispered to herself, "For them." Then she pushed the throttle forward. The A-10 screamed as it dove. Engines howling, steel wings cutting into the canyon, enemy fire erupted, the air alive with flashes and smoke. She bore down on the gun nests, heart hammering, her hands steady on the trigger. And just as the canyon shook with the roar of her cannon, a missile locked onto her tail. The warning tone inside the cockpit shrieked like a scream. The missile was locked, closing fast, twisting through the canyon like a serpent of fire. Sarah's breath hitched, her eyes snapping to the instruments, then back to the jagged walls rushing past. Every second stretched, the world narrowing to a single choice: pull up and risk slamming into rock, or hold steady and try to outfly death itself. She chose neither. She chose something no one would expect. With a violent yank on the stick, she cut her engines, stalling the A-10 mid-dive. The missile shot past her nose, overshooting by inches before detonating against the canyon wall. The explosion tore the air apart, showering rocks and flames down into the gorge. For a moment, it felt like the earth itself was collapsing. But Sarah's A-10 roared back to life as she reignited the engines, the thunder of her wings shoving back against gravity. She was still alive. Barely. Her radio crackled. Donovan's voice shouting through the static. "Viper, are you hit?" She exhaled hard, her chest aching from the G-force, but her voice was steady. "Negative." Still in the fight. Down below, the Green Berets were watching in disbelief. They had seen pilots before, had seen men with steel nerves dive into fire, but what this woman was doing defied logic. She wasn't just flying the warthog, she was dragging it through hell by sheer will. Donovan looked at his men, bloody and battered, and for the first time in hours hope wasn't just a whisper, it was roaring above them. Sarah leveled out, scanning the canyon floor again. The heavy machine guns were still in place, still threatening to turn the escape route into a death corridor. She couldn't afford another near miss. One mistake and her jet would be shredded, but hesitation was poison, and Sarah never swallowed it. She dropped altitude, the A-10 skimming so low that dust kicked up in her wake. Her finger tightened on the trigger, and the GAU-8 cannon spat fire. The nests erupted, torn apart in a storm of steel. Men scattered, weapons went silent, and for the first time the canyon began to break open. "Path is clear," she called out, her voice fierce over the comms. "Move now. Go." Donovan didn't wait. He shouted to his team, dragging the wounded to their feet, adrenaline driving them forward. Red smoke still clung to the air as they sprinted through the chaos, stumbling over rock and dirt, weapons firing blind behind them. Every step felt like it could be their last, but above them the A-10 circled like a guardian angel, unleashing fury on anything that dared to move against them. The Green Berets were running, but the enemy wasn't done. Shadows poured from caves, rifles cracking, chasing the fleeing soldiers. Donovan turned, raising his weapon, knowing they couldn't outrun them all. Then the canyon lit up again. Sarah diving, guns blazing, her rounds carving a wall of fire between the enemy and her men. It was as if she'd built a shield of lead and flame, daring anyone to cross it. No one did, but the price was climbing. Sarah glanced at her fuel gauge, the numbers bleeding low. She was running out. One more pass, maybe two. After that, she wouldn't have the juice to make it back to base. She keyed her mic, her voice quieter now. "Donovan, how many left standing?" The reply came heavy. 7. Too critical. "We're moving." 7. Out of 12. Her stomach tightened, but she shoved the pain aside. She couldn't think about the ones they'd lost. Not yet. Her only focus was the living. Copy. Keep moving. I'll cover you. Her last pass had to count. She swung the A-10 wide, lining up for another strike. Her body was screaming from the strain, every nerve lit with fire. But her mind was sharp. She could see the exit of the canyon now, a stretch of dirt and jagged stone leading to open desert. Freedom. If she could just buy them 2 more minutes, they'd make it. Then it happened. Another plume of smoke. Another missile. This one came from high on the ridge, angled perfectly to cut her off. The warning tone blared again, louder, harsher, the sound of death closing in. Sarah gritted her teeth, eyes narrowing. She was out of tricks. No stall, no dive could save her this time. Unless she pulled back hard, not to escape, but to meet it. Head on. The canyon filled with a deafening roar as the missile streaked toward her nose. At the last possible heartbeat, she released flares, dozens of them, fire and sparks exploding in a blossom of light. The missile swerved, confused, searching, and then slammed into the rock wall, detonating in a blast that shook the ground like an earthquake. The shockwave slammed into her jet, rattling every bolt, but she held on, teeth gritted, until the sky leveled again. She was still flying. Against every odd, she was still flying. Below, Donovan and his men burst out of the canyon at last, stumbling into the open desert night. They collapsed, dragging their wounded into the shadow of a rocky outcrop. The stars above seemed brighter than they'd ever been, but none shone like the sight of that A-10 circling overhead. Donovan pressed the radio again, his voice breaking. "Viper, we're out, we're clear. You saved us." For the first time all night, Sarah allowed herself a breath. The kind of breath that fills the chest with something more than oxygen, something like victory, something like relief. Her hands trembled on the controls, not from fear but from the weight of what had just been carried. She turned the Warthog toward home, fuel dangerously low, but her heart lighter than it had been in years. Behind her, the canyon was still burning, echoing with the ghosts of battle. Ahead, the desert stretched into silence again. On the ground, the Green Berets lay in the sand, staring up at the stars. They would never forget the sound of her voice on the radio, the roar of her cannons saving them when the world was closing in. Donovan whispered it to himself like a prayer. The storm. She was the storm. And Sarah, flying into the night, didn't hear it. She didn't need to. She already knew. She had promised herself long ago that if she ever earned her wings, they wouldn't just be hers. They would belong to every soul who needed her. To every soldier praying for light in the darkest canyon. That night she kept that promise. And sometimes, a promise is enough to change the course of everything. Because in the end, it wasn't the machine that saved them. It wasn't the steel or the gunfire. It was the woman who refused to let fear win. It was the storm she carried inside her. And that storm turned despair into survival. That storm turned silence into hope. That storm saved lives.